Okay, hello everybody. We seem to be gathering up here. We're going to get started here. Um, I appreciate everybody for joining us this afternoon. I think we have uh, some folks here who are going to be part of a conversation everybody here is really interested to learn more about. Let me start just by introducing myself. I'll talk a little bit about how we're going to do this. We'll introduce our three folks who are kind enough to be joining us right now, and then we'll get rolling. So I'm Daniel Elihu Kramer. I'm the producing artistic director of Chester Theater Company. And we are, like so many, not producing live in-person theater this summer. So we've been trying to get a lot of other conversations and events going. And this is one of a series. Some of you joined us for some earlier webinars. One with Matt Wolf, who's the New York Times theater critic in London. One with Chris Veier and Steve Oxman, who are Chicago theater writers. We've also been doing talkbacks on a range of productions. But this is only our third of these webinar events, and we're excited to get to do that. We want to let you know how this is going to work. I'm going to spend some time in conversation with our panelists, but we also want to make sure that you get a chance to ask your questions and find out about anything we don't get to that you want to know more about. So you will see there's a question and answer feature. If you are on a computer, probably if you just glide down to the bottom, you will see the Q&A option. For some iPads and other tablets, it may sometimes be that it's at the top to get those. So please go ahead and do that as you go. If you have any technical concerns, please throw those into chat, and somebody who's monitoring with us will see if they can help you out. And again, please put your questions into the Q&A, and what will happen is that at a certain point, Tara Franklin, who is our associate artistic director, will start to feed us those questions rather, so that we can bring them into the conversation. What I'd really love to do first, though, is just introduce our three panelists, or in a sense, really ask them to introduce themselves, because I think one of the most interesting things to me right off the bat about COVID Theater Think Tank has been the range of folks that they're bringing in from such kind of different places, different parts of doing the theater work. So let me just start by asking them each if they can just introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their own backgrounds. Matt, can I ask you to start us off?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thanks, Daniel. My name is Matt Ross. I am a press agent and producer in New York, generally city, but upstate right now, as with everything being remote. And I've been a press agent for 15 years or so, working on a variety of Broadway, off-Broadway productions, theaters, institutions, regional. I have a press agency that I founded 6.5 years ago. I'm a member of the board of APPAM, which is the Association of Theatrical Press Agents and Managers, and of the Brooklyn-based theater company, The Team, which is led by Rachel Chafkin.
Terrific, thank you. Beverly, can I come to you next and ask you to just tell us a little bit about your work in theater?
Sure can. Hello, everyone. My name is Beverly Jenkins. I come to you from Hadestown. I'm the production stage manager. So I was on March 12th, and I expect to be whenever we go back to work. I am a very proud graduate of Howard University in Washington, D.C. I have a background in stage management, theater, arts administration. I used to run a music organization called the Black Rock Coalition. And that's who I am. And I came to the CTT through Rachel Chafkin.
Terrific. Thank you. And Penny, let me come to you next.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Thanks, Daniel. I'm Penny Dalton. On March 12th, I was the company manager of Caroline or Change at Studio 54, working for the Roundabout Theater. We were supposed to have our invited dress that evening and start previews the next day, but I'm hopeful I will still be the company manager when we're back, whenever that is. I'm the president of APPAM, where Matt serves on the board. And I've been a company manager for over 20 years. I think Caroline or Change is my 26th show. And I'm an alum of Smith College. I was a theater major there. So hello to all you Smith people who are observing today and participating. I'm also super lucky to have had the opportunity to work with both Matt and Beverly on a variety of shows. So that's a great connect. And Matt brought me into the CTT. So excited to be here today.
Terrific. Well, thank you all. And again, I'm just so appreciative of your taking the time with us, not to mention the work that I know you're doing. Matt, let me come to you. Can you talk a little bit about how this got started? What was the genesis of it, and kind of how it grew a little bit as it started to find its way?
Sure. We started up in early April, so theater shut down essentially in New York on March 12th, and really everywhere. And when we shut down on March 12th, there was very much a feeling of like, see you in 4 weeks, see you in 6 weeks, maybe 8. If it's beyond that, that's really crazy. And then a lot of other things happened, and I think people started to look at different facets of what was going on. And there were a couple things, but what became apparent to me was that it became clear pretty quickly that this was not going to just go away. It was not going to disappear. It was not going to be a binary solution where like COVID was here one day and gone the next. That there would be phases and there would be adjustments we'd have to make, and that, perhaps epidemiologists have been telling us for some years that a pandemic is coming because we're a more globalized society, and we didn't listen. So there are some safety and health changes we need to make going forward. And so different people were doing work. A lot of people have focused on the question of when. We can't control the when for the most part, nor do we seek to. That depends on a lot of different factors, which we can talk about later on. But we're really focused on the how, on what we can do. So concurrently, I remember watching when Governor Cuomo was doing his daily press conferences. He talked about, basically the state of New York had a lot to do, and he was looking for industries to put together solutions and get creative. And I thought, okay, maybe this is something we can do. And so I specifically wanted to reach out to people who, live their professional lives in and around theaters. So get a cross-section of disciplines and also a cross-section of theaters. So we are Broadway, off-Broadway, regional, and we are roles like company manager and production stage manager, and general managers, and a few other producers, directors, designer, technical directors, musicians, sound, all kinds of disciplines within that. These are the people who inhabit these theaters, and hopefully we can sort of bounce around what the challenges will be and how we can come up with creative solutions to them, and together sort of explore the science. So that was the thesis of the group. We started with probably like 12 of us, Penny and Beverly included in that additional group. We are now 40 strong with some special advisors, which is great. We have subcommittees, and now in addition to our subcommittees, we have like work groups, which are, I don't know, something smaller than subcommittees, but have a very specific task as opposed to a portion. But we're still working through it, as is much of the world, frankly, because this is something we're learning about and is unfolding before us, and we still don't have a lot of answers. But we do feel, I think, that we're making progress, and that we're learning things, and things that will hopefully create helpful guidance for the field, so that not everybody has to go off and do their own scientific research and interpret it for theater.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's such a critical thing to talk about, right? So as somebody who runs a very small theater company up in the Berkshires, the Berkshire area, we feel like one of the things we can't do is try to go reinvent the wheel, right? We really are looking for guidance. We're looking for knowledge. We're looking for expertise. And we really, we want to know whenever it is, first off, that it gets clear that we can come back to live performance. We then want to know, well, what are the questions we need to be asking? What are the protocols we need to be following, et cetera? And we're looking for roadmaps. And I think that's an important part of what you all are up to. I'm curious, for Beverly and Penny, I think one of the interesting things about this group is what Matt just described, right? Which is that there are folks who do so many different kinds of theater work here. And I'm curious for each of you, what you feel, the fact that you have the perspective you have brings into the conversation, and what those other perspectives that you're sharing these tasks and these discussions with bring into the conversation. So I'll toss that to Beverly or Penny, whoever wants to start us, but I think I'd love to hear from each of you on that.
Beverly, you want to go? I can go. I mean, I think in the case of Beverly and me, I think we're the people certainly in the Broadway world who are the closest to all of the different members of the company. So trying to keep that perspective of what those various needs might be, I think is something that we definitely bring to the table. I will say what's interesting is how, because we have so many multidisciplinary people involved, like we easily think, oh, well, we've thought of all of these different areas. And, a couple of months ago, somebody was like, oh, wait a minute, what about microphones? And who's handling the microphones? And what's the protocol involved there? And, which then brought another person into our group, because that's other information that we need to have. So I think as big picture as we can be about things, we still realize, we don't think of absolutely every little piece of it. And so it's nice to be able to find those other missing pieces to create a more whole approach to the whole issue.
Sure. It's funny you mentioned microphone. I think of that photo that was just in the Times of them, trying to mic up the actor who's playing Jesus in Godspell up at Berkshire Theater Group right now.
Right.
So yeah, Beverly, let me come to you as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, being that I'm backstage and I'm stage manager, I have my hands in everything in the theater, same way that Penny does, just different, we come from different perspective. And when you think about the safety of everyone, I have to think about everyone in that building. So it's important to have someone like me on this team, because I can think about the other person who comes in. And when we're talking about doing some type of study, it's like, yeah, but that, when we talk about, like, for example, a time and motion study, it's not as easy as one may think. Well, I'm sure we'll just really get into a time and motion study later, but that's when you need to know where is somebody at what specific time. And we do theater, and it changes every 5 seconds, and so besides thinking about where are people, we also have to think about what happens when other people come in. We have understudies, we have musicians, swings, we have, so good though. So we have to think about all of that, and working hand in hand with the front of house and the backs and the backstage and the crew and wardrobe and ushers. So it's a big job. It's not as from the doorman to the porters to the director who drops by. You have to think about when we go back, what the changes will be. Will you be allowed to drop in unannounced? That's a no.
Yeah. By the way, Beverly's like, and I know the answer to that question.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, and I think part of the point you make that's here is that I think it's really easy from the outside to think that the question about when theater can reopen is a question about when is it safe for the audience. But the truth is that the audience, I'm not saying it's easy to keep an audience safe, but the answers to those questions are almost the clearest answers of all of these questions, because we got to get people through lobbies, we got to figure out bathrooms, but at a certain point they get to seats and they mostly sit in them, right? And I think we all know what dressing rooms tend to look like, and what the hallways from dressing rooms to getting to the stairs to getting to the stage tends to look like. And for those of us who spend a lot of our time backstage, we actually know that those are some of the places where it's the most difficult to imagine how we get to the kinds of safety protocols that will really protect all of the makers and the artists who are involved in doing this work.
We have three, well, we have more subcommittees, but we started with three subcommittees: company safety, audiences in front of house, and then organization economics, which sort of speaks to how do we address all the things that we need to do in those other two. And now we've branched out to touring and marketing as well. But I will say personally, I wake up in a different place every week on which, between front of house and back of house, which I'm more, I'm very concerned about both, but like which I find more challenging. It is, I've joked, like the world's worst game of whack-a-mole. It does feel like sometimes like you've got a handle on something and then it's like, but then there's this issue. Yes, the audience sort of stays put, right? The audience can be masked. The audience, social distancing is a question, because for most that isn't really a viable model for creating theater, except in special circumstances. So there are parts of it, they do stay still. They're not talking to each other. They are, for the most part, not dancing. Mamma Mia curtain calls notwithstanding. But that part can be simpler. At the same time, it is a larger group of people. You have more group mixing, as our epidemiologists have taught us to call it. And if you're putting them that close together, they are sharing the same air for a long period of time, which we've seen can be a really major risk factor if you don't take the proper precautions and interventions. On the company safety side, obviously, right, you have people, yes, we're seeing those pictures, but I think in the long term, I believe, most of what we see in strategies is going to be about theater without masks and all of that PPE. And so, of course, you're putting people more in harm's way, but you're dealing with a more finite set of people and circumstances. So, you can do testing. And if you're watching basketball at all, which is actually, this is a group we're working very closely with because of these parallels, right? You've got the crowd and you've got the game on court. I wish we had their TV deals, because then we could put on theater like they are. But they are playing 5-on-5 basketball, and I'm going to knock wood, but since they entered the bubble in Orlando, they have not had any new cases of COVID. And the answer to that is testing and rapid testing. So there are these different ways, there are these two very macro things that we have to try and solve for. But the approaches, I think, have to be different.
Yeah, I mean, that's so fascinating. I do think that basketball comparison is a really interesting comparison, right? Because while we cannot guarantee that that's going to continue to work, they're making it work so far. And if you don't think this is long enough to learn anything, just watch baseball. It's clearly been long enough to learn some things about what doesn't work, right? And what doesn't work is to basically say, well, no audiences, but other than that, nothing real.
Baseball tested twice a week. I think they had less people in the dugout. They did not bubble. They had travel, which has been an issue for several leagues, including soccer.
They went home to their families. They came back to work.
Yeah, I mean, and just think about, like, how much are you expanding your pod by every time you do that? Everyone, who is your family seeing? And so you're just creating that risk of contamination. They opted not to they had an Arizona bubble plan that was very similar to the NBA bubble plan, and they opted not to do that. I know now that they have moved from testing twice a week, which is crazy considering the circumstances they were playing under, to daily, which I think is closer to what I think the NBA is doing daily, and different types of rapid tests and other kinds of monitoring as well. But they still, getting on airplanes and traveling from city to city still poses real challenges. So I'm encouraged by the NBA plan. They've been really helpful, and we've had a great sort of information trading with them, especially as it pertains to rapid testing.
Well, that's fascinating. Yeah, I'm curious if any of you talk a little bit more about where you see testing fitting into this, because as I listen to you, it's clear that this is not a conversation about what to do in some imagined future where we have completely somehow magically eliminated coronavirus and COVID-19, et cetera, right? This is about saying, what are the ways we're going to operate safely, either in a future that still contains some portion of this risk, or in a future where we just use this experience to realize there are other risks that are going to come our way as well, right? and sort of what is that thinking in terms of where, not, my question is not when do you think we'll come back, right? Because that's not what you're there to do, but what is the world you're trying to imagine how to come back in look like, right? How would you describe that world rather than put a date on it? How would you describe the world or various worlds in which you're starting to try to ask these questions about how do we get back to making and sharing theater? And this is for anybody, really.
I think in addition to the rapid testing, which, we're obviously having a lot of conversations about the actual mechanics and logistics of doing that, certainly in the Broadway world. The other thing that I think is really, really important that we're finding out more and more is the whole, sorry, I have a siren.
Okay, well, Penny, there you go.
That New York City. The other thing that we're finding is really, really important is the whole issue of ventilation and filtration. And the fact that most of the Broadway theaters that we're all working in are, 100 plus years old. And, probably those systems are not functioning, the way that they should be, or the way certainly that they should be now, given the information that we have about aerosol spread and airflow in enclosed places.
Yeah, I know that, folks may know that Smith College actually just yesterday changed its entire plan for the fall.
Yeah.
And went from bringing some students back for the fall under very carefully monitored circumstances to saying, actually, no, we will be a remote teaching institution for the fall semester. But even so, we're dealing with things like our scene shop, et cetera, and starting to learn stuff like how many times an hour should you be replacing the air in the entirety of a given space, right? And sometimes getting numbers like, well, somebody says it should be 10 times an hour, that, et cetera, whatever the numbers are. But what should be that turnover?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the airflow thing is really important. And we have some, we issued like a very initial piece of guidance on airflow, but we're getting more deeply into it now. I think because we're trying to develop guidance for a whole field, you have Broadway theaters that are 100 years old and are large, and there's money there, but there are also challenges. You have off-Broadway theaters that have been in basements for 30 years. Amazing institutions, and theaters around the country and scenic shops. And so, what it feels like is not productive is like an idealized solution, right? Like 10 times, change the air 10 times, great, wonderful. And it's sort of not how interventions work, is what we're learning from. I should also say that one of the most important components of this is that we work with a team of advisors at CUNY Graduate School of Public Health. And so it's the dean plus 7 of their senior faculty over there, including several epidemiologists and industrial hygienists. And what we've learned from them, it's about, even when you're doing like modeling experiments, which we're working with, or we might be embarking on, it's not about trying to predict exactly how many infections or what the exact percentage risk of infection is if you do these things. It's about looking at factors together and what really diminishes that risk, what really mitigates it. So what are the things that we want to move? Yes, there should be some baseline levels, like MERV 13 is a reference point for air filtration.
That's a filtration, by the way, yeah.
I don't remember what MERV stands for. I keep trying to, but
no, but I know what you mean. I actually just was in a conversation the other day where somebody was concerned. They said, well, I hear we're supposed to have MERV 13 and they have MERV 14. I was like, no, that's better, not worse. Don't worry, you're okay.
Yes.
And it is minimum efficiency reporting value.
Yes.
Thank you.
It's just as helpful as MERV, right?
Right.
Exactly. Don't you feel like everything's clearer now?
I think it basically means the higher the number goes, the smaller particles it can capture, and
the greater percentage of smaller particles.
Think of just finer filters. So that's basically what it is. And so we've been able to work with ASHRAE, is another acronym I'm not going to attempt, but they are the trade organization for HVAC engineers, ventilation engineers, refrigeration engineers. We were able to start working with an expert from there, because we've run into this issue. It's like, if we increase our filtration, our system will break, our system won't work, the air won't be cool. because all of our systems have been built for efficiency and comfort. And she screen shared a chart with us and just disproved all of it very quickly, because she's an expert in this field, about ways that you can choose the right filter and fit them properly, that you see no increased pressure drop. So that's, that is progress that I think our field can use. We can say, yes, you have an old air system that has a MERV 8 in it, but here is a chart that shows you can go from this MERV 8 filter to this MERV 13 with minimal stress on your system. So that's a positive thing. And ventilation as well. Like, yes, it would be great to have 100% fresh air. Most of us live in climates where we can't do that. Right. So, it's not, we want to make sure that perfect isn't the enemy of the good. I think it's also, we're very conscious of what our output is. We don't want to create something where it feels like we're throwing the book at first of all, we're not in a position of jurisdiction here. We're just trying to help provide guidance and roadmaps, as you said. But we also don't want to drop a book on theaters across the country who are trying to use this, because, people will take one look at it and say, okay, I'll just do theater when this is all over, which again,
if you feel like you're well, I can't do all 149 things that are laid out here, I guess I just have to go home.
That's not how scientists who we talk to are thinking about it. Nobody's give up. They say, okay, how much more fresh air circulation? How close can you get to that? How much better can you make the filter? MERV 13 is great, but if you can get to MERV 10, MERV 10 is pretty good. Those are the conversations we're having. So sometimes it feels, occasionally on these calls, it feels like we're obsessed with the science and the research that we've done and the technical stuff. And, that our experts and our epidemiologists and our ventilation engineers are saying to us, basically, live a little, experiment, figure something out here, work it in a way that's more fluid, which is funny, a little reversal of right brain, left brain. But it's an interesting process. And I think that part of it has been consistent in every area of trying to find solutions.
Right. I mean, so you've talked a little bit about ventilation and filtration, right? Rapid testing, and it's very interesting to me to hear you talk about testing, right? Because it would be easy to be well, that's just sort of the world has to figure that out, and then these guys will come in and do what they do. But I'm curious, sort of, what led you to see testing as such a part of what you all need to be in conversation about. So I think that's, and when you say that, I'm curious, for whom do you mean it? And, what brings it to the top of, not the top of, but, makes it among the priorities that you're trying to think about?
Well, I mean, that's an interesting question. I think it's one we're not going to answer. I think some will see that as, personally, I see rapid testing as really important for backstage for the company, because you can't you're asking people to get really close without masks, without social distancing. So the best way and the most responsible thing to do is to reassure with the greatest degree of certainty that when people are entering the building that night, they are not shedding the virus. You could certainly apply it to audiences as well. I think that depends on when you're looking to reopen and what stage we're in. But we were, rapid testing is something that, started to bubble up. And then we had a conversation with one of our advisors, Andy Slavitt, who connected us with the NBA, and they talked about how rapid testing is really a solution for them. And again, in parallel, once they have all kinds of weight room restrictions and locker room restrictions. Once they set foot on the court, it's just like us. Once we put people on a stage or backstage or in a pit, social distancing and PPE is not a very good solution for our field, nor for theirs. So there's one of the more inspiring things, I know not everything about this time can be inspiring, is the way that industries and fields are really working together. I am on at 4:00 today. I'm joining this weekly call, which I just started joining last week, that includes people from a bunch of major sports leagues, as well as Yale and MIT and Rutgers and the people who are developing these tests, a bunch of, Scott Gottlieb and Andy Slavitt, a bunch of real public health experts who, we're on the road to this Yale rapid saliva test that seems so far very reliable, and is supposed to cost between $1 and $6 and is due to have FDA approval. Andy Slavitt tweeted this out, so now I feel like I'm not saying proprietary information.
Oh no, tell us it's a secret. Tell us we're the first to know, Matt. That's what we want.
I got an email yesterday that apparently it's supposed to get FDA emergency use approval by the end of this week. This is a rapid test from saliva that costs between $1 and $6. That is a game changer for our society. And, you know, in lieu of federal government taking a leading role on this type of thing, which is what we expect. And yes, the National Institute of Health and Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx have certainly done a lot and continue to do a lot. It is actually a lot of scientists, health professionals, and industries who have banded together to push these kinds of things through. I mean, the reason that this is going to get emergency use approval, or part of the reason, other than the fact that they created this test, is because they teamed up with the NBA, who said, hey, we have thousands of people in a contained space who we need to test regularly. How about that for a clinical trial? And so these are the kinds of interactions that are happening. And hopefully we can extend some of these to theater if we have reliable tests. There are some people who want to start doing workshops and labs and small scale productions, outdoor productions, and we can bring those kind of pilots into our field and start developing that while bringing greater degrees of safety. So like that, you know, that level of just sharing of wisdom, and we all, there's nothing, we've found nothing proprietary, no one who is like unwilling to talk about what they want to do. Everybody is just very willing to have a conversation and work together to find solutions because there's something we can all learn from each other. That gives me a lot of hope for our field and others too.
I mean, I think that's great to hear in and beyond theater, both. You know, it's interesting. I mean, what I've been reading about rapid testing is sort of jives with what you were saying about the medical and the scientific folks saying, hey, you don't have to be so rigid, right? Because there was a point where they were saying, well, rapid testing may have a slight drop off in reliability, which maybe won't even be true. But they said, but you know what? A slight drop off in reliability is so worth it if you can get a slightly lower percentage of reliability, but you're going to know right away. That's vastly more meaningful than a slightly more reliable test that it takes you 7 days to get the answers to. Because that answer is actually meaningless by the time you get it.
Yes. And that gap is closing too between reliability. I mean, there was the Abbott test that came out early and maybe the FDA approved too quickly. And people maybe started relying on it a bit too much. And then that actually caused the FDA to sort of clamp down on approving some of these rapid tests that are more reliable. But yeah, people are using words like screening tests versus diagnostic tests. Right. And it depends on the circumstance you're putting them in. Now, for putting people backstage, we probably need something that's more of that's very accurate, right? Because we're actually putting them in a situation. If you were testing the audience, I would say a screener test is great. Like whatever you're sort of weeding out, every increase in accuracy is great there. But that's how people are talking about it. But a lot of really, the rapid testing situation is there are enough really good, really sound possibilities out there that it is widely expected from the people we talk to that we will have multiple rapid tests widely available by mid-fall.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
You know, Beverly, when I think about all of this stuff, I know that even in the simplest of circumstances, you know, the person I count on to assure me that everything is happening safely is the stage manager, right? That production stage manager is the person where I just turn and I'm like, is that okay? Right? And also the person I rely on if I'm not around to come and tell me I have a concern about something, right? And right. So I'm curious here to what extent you must be sort of thinking with that mindset, that stage manager's mindset of saying, you know, what are all the questions that I'm going to have to learn to ask that are on top of all the questions I was always
speaking about the whole rapid testing, that is going to be absolutely necessary, because just speaking for the actors that I take care of now, they're not going to come back into that building. And I don't know any actor or anyone who works in our business who's going to want to come into the building, take a test on Tuesday, go do a show, and then on Friday they get the Tuesday result. That's just not going to happen. It's ridiculous. So what we have to figure out is how to take the test, you know, send them someplace where they can hold up until we can get that answer. And, you know, that just changes the whole game of calls and when people come in rehearsal. That's a whole different ball game right there.
Yeah.
But in my position, I do have to know, I have to feel this is the safest way to bring people in the building. Because when it's not, they're going to come to me. So I have to be 100% in my soul. It might not be correct, but in my soul, I have to be secure that the rapid testing and whatever plexiglass we're putting up and our routine for how we get on stage and get off stage is, you know, what water bottle can you use? Because I think the water fountains are done.
Yeah, interesting.
You know,
Yeah. Well, so I've got two other things I want to just touch on, and then I want to make sure we start to get to some of the questions from the folks who are with us today. One thing I'm curious about is, you know, as I mentioned to you before we got started, I think a lot of the folks who are on with us have Berkshire connections or are Berkshire based. And this is a pretty fascinating week for professional theater in the Berkshires, or rather, I would say what's going on in the Berkshires is a pretty fascinating week for professional theater in this country, which is to say we have both the first equity play opening on Harry Clark, followed, you know, about 7 seconds later by the first equity musical opening at Barrington Theater Group with Godspell. And I'm curious, you know, not for you to pass judgment on any of that, but what are you watching for? What are you curious about? What strikes you about any of that activity that's going on? This is for any of you all.
Well, I mean, I first of all, I think it's fantastic. And it's such a great opportunity for both the people who are making the art and the people who are getting a chance to see it. I think Barrington's idea, their original idea about being inside, we were super excited about seeing how that all played out and how the, you know, flow of people and all of those things happened. And
right, and we didn't
get
to do that experiment.
The state stepped in there, so that's a, you know, that's an interesting other layer as we talk about things like trying to figure out touring protocols. You know, unions can come up with it, whatever they want to approve. It doesn't mean that the state that you're traveling to is going to let you do those things, right?
Right,
so
and just for clarification here, right, what was going to happen is we, in Massachusetts, we are in phase 3 of a laid out 4-phase plan, but phase 3 has 2 parts. And it turns out we didn't get to part 2, and part 2 of phase 3 is what Julianne Boyd needed to have happen for them to be able to proceed with the initial indoor plan. So they've basically crossed the street and gone outside. Right.
And fantastic that they had the flexibility to be able to do that and not just throw up their hands and say, well, never mind. So, I mean, also it's a 1-person show, which is, I think is a really smart way to start back because, you know, do it on a smaller scale and make sure that that works. I think Berkshire Theater with a musical already planning to be outside had that on their side to start out with, right? I mean, obviously from the photographs that I saw in the Times article, I mean, they have staged that production in a specifically COVID safe way.
Right, and they've done that, sort of embracing that as part of their visual life, right. But obviously we're not going to do that with every play for the next fill in the blank amount of time.
But I do think that they've put other protocols into place that will translate. I mean, the idea that each person has a separate box for all of their personal items, like those are things that we probably should have been doing before now, quite honestly, for a variety of reasons, but that I think will continue beyond COVID, right? The idea that like being safe and sanitary is actually a little more work than we probably were putting toward it to this point.
Right. I mean, I think we all know, you know, that cold that everybody in the company gets, and you go, huh, that's not so great. Or, you know, where's yet that eye infection that half the company gets, or, you know, whatever it might be. And you go, yeah, some of this stuff we should be on in any future.
Right. And some of that, I think, quite honestly, has to do with the ventilation and airflow. So, you know, maybe we're solving those things simultaneously, which will be better for all of us.
Yes.
That's fascinating. Yeah.
A lot of people have theorized that the seasonal flu may see a decrease this year because, you know, there were all these comparisons. Well, it's no worse than the flu. And then you look at the statistics for the seasonal flu and you're like, that's terrible. Why do we accept that much death in our country?
It is in fact worse than the flu, but actually the flu's awful.
The flu's awful. So we have to, you know, these are things that maybe we should have looked at before. And so, you know, both nationally and worldwide and for our fields, yeah, I mean, I think we've known for a while the airflow situation in most theaters is not great, and I think this is a good wake up call, and we just have to be aware that these threats are going to be real going forward. And now that it's happened here, every time something, we've already seen this in news cycles, every time someone gets, I'm going to exaggerate here for hyperbole, like every time someone gets a strange checkup somewhere in the world, the whole news cycle has a moment. They're like, another one? Is it happening again? Right? This, you know, we've gone from an "it can't happen here" mentality to a "it has happened here" and now it's going to happen here all the time. So we just have to be aware that these are not, you know, these are not 12-month fixes. These are permanent fixes we need to make.
Yeah.
And we may not have the same level of, I certainly don't imagine us having the same level of testing all the time for the future, but, you know, we'll phase in and out, but we will have procedures and protocols ready to go for these circumstances.
Then the other thing I'm curious about, you know, we have been going through a stretch right now. If I, you know, I've lost track of the months, right? But we are about 4.5, coming up on 5 months into this shutdown. We are also now a number of months into some of the social activity that's been going on around protests that followed the murder of George Floyd, the increased activity around Black Lives Matter, the ways in which that is going on nationwide, but also the ways in which within the theater, through through a bunch of different channels, but especially through something called We See You White American Theater. People have been trying to say, you know, it's funny, I see an analogy, funny is the wrong word, but Matt, you talk about things we've been doing wrong all along, and now we're looking at them. And this is, of course, the same, right? This is not, none of what's going on around Black Lives Matter is about something that's new. It is about renewed and, one hopes, increased and sustained attention to something that has been devastating for a long time. I'm curious for you all whether you see any connection here, because it seems to me that these are all questions about what do we do at the far end of this, right? And to what extent is this like, let's get back to things as normal, and to what extent is this, how do things need to be different on whatever the far side is?
Normal's done. That normal will never be back again. So that normal's done. It's what is our new normal. Mm-hmm. This movement with Black Lives Matter would not be able to happen without COVID, because people were home, people were watching TV, there were no sports to put your attention. Oh, look at the pretty light over here. Don't look at what's happening here. And so people who really thought that these things were not happening got to witness it in just about real time. And so because people were home, because people were not working, because people were available, this movement was able to catch the steam it should have caught back when, you know, the young man was killed, you know, when Emmett Till was
fill in the blank, right? I mean, you go to Trayvon Martin or somebody, but then you just keep going and going.
How far back do we go? Exactly. But it should have started then, you know, and it should have just kept going. And these changes that are being asked for are changes to things that had just been accepted, you know, especially in our business. It was just assumed that everyone in casting, you know, there are no Black casting people who do Broadway. No. Well, you know, I know Black people, you know, or it was okay that someone would, that it was, that I personally stood for, look, she's in management, she's the PSM, she's Black, she's female. That is 4 boxes checked.
Right.
We don't need to hire anymore. You know, it's like, are we though? Are we covered? You know, and in a way, I kind of take the actors, I put the actors in a little different box, me personally, because there is the thought of we need to diversify on stage. But now the thought is, besides the stage, what about the people who really have the power? What about the people who do the hiring? What about the people who do the designing? You know, and don't tell me, oh, I don't know any. You haven't looked for any is the real answer. So now people have to look. You know, so we're going to be all over the place. We as in brown people, we as in, you know, people of color, we're going to be all over the place because we're qualified. We just haven't been given the opportunities, you know. Simple as that. Simple as that. You can't tell me a woman who went to Howard University that there are none. But I went to school with tons of them, and they are there, and they are working. You just haven't hired them.
Yeah.
So that's my speech for the day. Thank you.
No, yeah, no, do it. Bring it, Beverly. Absolutely.
And I'm not saying, and this is not about hate or dislike, because I personally, I hire who I can't hire the same people all the time, because the way I hire my assistants, I look and see what is the show, what are we looking for, what's the atmosphere that needs to be around, you know, and what do I personally need. And sometimes I need my homeboy, who happens to be tall, white, you know, to back me up. But then does everybody on the team have to be there? No, you know, and you know, and is my department the only department that's thinking about this? 99% of the time, yes. You know, so
Right.
And that's
Yeah.
what has to change. That's what has to change.
Yeah, no, these feel so linked right now. And I think you're right to talk about the ways that what we've been dealing with around COVID-19 is part of what made this movement and moment possible, right? And so I think that we're all thinking about that. If it's all right with you all, I'd like to go to some of the questions that folks who are watching us have put in. Tara, can we bring you in on audio, and can you let us know if there's some stuff people want to hear about?
Sure. I'm actually going to go to this question. It says, is this think tank working with any other organizations such as AEA, AGMA, IATSE, SMA, ESA, etc.?
Great. And rather than giving you what every one of those sets of letters stands for, a lot of those are asking about unions.
Right.
Yeah, the answer is yes. We've been working really actively with Actors Equity. We've had ventilation conversations with them. They've actually joined our testing work group, their national safety director, because we want to be in dialogue and we want to help as connective tissue. We've worked with other unions as well. Obviously, we represent, just on this call, unions, and then if you branch out to the rest of our 40-person membership, we represent a whole bunch of organizations. So yeah, we're in dialogue with as many people as we can be. I think that's our we don't have secrets as a group. We want to share. We want to sort of share information because we think bouncing it back and forth is the most productive thing. So yeah, we've let people know we are very much open for conversation, and a lot of people have taken us up on that.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I'm certainly reassured to hear that those organizations are wanting to be in dialogue with you all, because I think it's going to be so important. You know, as a member of SDC, I want to know that, you know, everybody wants to be part of this conversation and to be learning together. What else do you have for us, Tara?
Okay, let's see. So from the guides that Hale and American Shakespeare have pertaining to Backstage, have you found any pros and cons from those, and would like more info? I know we talked about it a little bit, but from how BTG and BFC are operating that are unique and can be used going forward.
That's a lot there.
I know.
So,
I don't know if I'm familiar with those specific guides, the Shakespeare.
yeah, I don't know. I know that there's been another that ART Institute has been trying to do some work around here, and again, not that they've put out a guide per se, but that there's sort of another group of folks who are trying to do some work around some of these same questions. But I guess let me broaden that a little bit and say, you know, do you find that there are other groups of folks working kind of in parallel to you? And, you know, what, if any, interaction is happening among those groups?
We have a whole Slack channel devoted to this. Every time someone finds a guideline that's even remotely close to our field, musicians, casinos, you name it, sports leagues, we send it around. Airlines, Tyler Perry studio, like, we send it around. At least a few of us are going to read it and study it and seeing if there's anything to glean. Not to judge it, just to find where are there parallels, how are they approaching it. I find some of the film guidelines really fascinating, and like the zone systems that they're using. I think, yeah, film set is a very different place from a theater, and
It's a much more controlled place in many
Yeah.
ways.
and a place that I don't know as well. I wouldn't see a zone system working for a theater personally, because I think you have to have, on the company side, you have to sort of have like a portal through which you walk, and once you walk through that portal, everyone has to be operating with basically the same level of safety. And I also, that's where the testing comes in. But it's interesting to see these different approaches, and we can learn from it. And sometimes it's, we're not even just looking for answers. We're looking, something someone sent around is like a whole bunch of questions that need to be answered before, I believe it was AFM, before like pit musicians go back to work. They said they didn't share any answers, just the questions. And we were like, great, let's tackle these. How many of these answers do we already feel like we know? How many have we not even asked? We will keep finding things like microphones where we're like, oh, how did we not think of that yet? Because there are so many things. So yeah, trying to learn and look at as much as we can from other fields
Sure.
is really important.
That's great. Tara, is there more?
Yeah, we just have this one, which is sort of seems more of a general thing, but it says, how, if at all, can we come back like companies in Seoul and Dubai have? It seems that their success is partly due to how well those governments handled the pandemic. Ours clearly is mishandling things. If our government can get things sorted, then how can we go back to work with no worry of having to shut down again?
So there are a lot of things there. So let me unpack that a little bit, right? I'm curious, first off, what you're seeing from places like that where the circumstances on the ground have given them different level of kind of confidence and ability in their ability to move forward. What are you learning from the places where the circumstances, in those countries are clearly further past the peak of crisis than we are? We may not be any distance past the peak of crisis. And first off, what do you learn from how they're going about their work?
Well, I'll say, first of all, in the case of Seoul, a couple of things. I mean, certainly there's a different cultural approach to pretty much everything versus what is happening in this country. So, testing is much faster there. Contact tracing is in place there. There's a respect for that level of, monitoring of individuals, which I'm not sure we will ever get to in this country. Also, the reminder that Seoul did they shut down their Phantom show for a brief period of time. So I think that reality always exists. And I think that's one of the things that we are certainly most concerned about, is that idea of going back too quickly and thinking that we know how we are doing this and then suddenly having to go back into a shutdown mode, right? I mean, that's sort of the most horrific result we could possibly have. I mean, Matt, do you want to talk a little bit about Sharon?
Yeah, so Sharon Kasif, who is Vice President of Production for Really Useful Group, oversaw that whole creation of those protocols to bring Phantom and now Cats back in Seoul. And she's part of our group, fortunately. She started actually as someone brought in as like a guest speaker. And then she's gone ahead and joined us fully, which has been terrific. And interestingly, she's, there's a lot to learn from the Seoul protocols. And at the same time, solving for a country where you have or a city like Seoul, where you have population density greater than New York, and their idea of a spike in cases is 14, is very different than solving for the US. However, she is now tasked with trying to bring some of those strategies into London. And so that is a lot closer to what we're trying to do in the US. And so we're working really closely together. And she's also really focused on rapid testing and those types of things. But they have really good hygiene and backstage protocols that we can build from, that makes sense here, because this shocked us, I think, when she told us there is no social distancing in South Korea. It's not part of their plan. There's mask wearing, and there is really good hygiene, and there is contact tracing when necessary. The government oversees all testing. as a production, they don't even choose who gets tested and when. The government will decide when a test is appropriate. And it's just a very different strategy. So the problem solving for that is just very different, but there is a lot to learn from what they've done, and it's really commendable that they've managed to do it. I'm also fascinated by the fact that you have a whole country that is doing mask wearing but not social distancing, and so far, knock wood, it's okay.
Right. I mean, that's the amazing thing, right? You can have any theory you want about whether that should work, but just, looking at the actual, facts on the ground, so far, it appears to work.
Yeah.
Beverly, you're back.
We
Hello.
fixed it, Beverly. It's
Yeah,
gone.
it's all done.
Back.
See you at work on Tuesday.
And then I guess I'm curious to what extent you, or especially some of the scientists, medical folks, et cetera, you've been working with, do you have a sense of like, here are the levels or the numbers we have to be at in sort of the world around us before any of this can even play out? Or is that not how the thinking works? I'm just curious about that.
Heard less in terms of exact numbers. I mean, early on, they sort of talked about how we were at 10 times the fatality rate of the seasonal flu, which we talked about earlier, also not being great, right? We were seeing I don't know if this holds true anymore because there are so many more cases. And obviously, now that we know it better, we've gotten better at treating it. Not us, doctors. But, we were looking at a 1% fatality rate for COVID versus a 0.1% fatality rate for the seasonal flu. And so bringing it closer there. But in general, everyone advises us to stay away from silver bullet thinking. There isn't one thing, even the vaccine. Vaccines are imperfect and they are not taken universally. That is going to be a battle around COVID. There is already a lot of hesitation around the vaccine. And then, there also have to be treatments that make it less severe, that make it less fatal. Therapeutics are also in the works and are also very important. God willing, if there was some kind of a Tamiflu for COVID where like you feel pretty bad, but you go home and you recuperate for a while, that would be amazing. And then the general rate of infection, if we can sort of smash that down low enough, I think that's really the cocktail of solutions we're looking at, where we start to return to some new normal, where I think we still have to be vigilant. And, it's when we asked about like, what do those phases look like? I think we asked Andy Slavitt this question. He was like, there's probably a little ping ponging around there, right? Like there's probably like you go down to a certain level and then, okay, maybe you open the valve too quick. There's a little bit of a climb. And so you slow down again. So there are questions of what we do. We talked earlier on the call about scaling up for theater. And I think that's true here too. We can't just turn on the lights of Lion King. Yeah, and be like, okay, everyone march down the aisles. We're fine now. I think we're going to have to start a little smaller.
Right. And I think that's hard to hear sometimes, right? I mean, I think that we want to be told that there's going to be this moment where you're just like, okay, remember how it was? That's how it is now.
Yeah. No. And I think how you come back and how long that process is going to take is also going to be different for everyone. And I think, in my head, as I think about what that process is, and we think about the people who are participating in a think tank, like I feel like I'm always biased toward like the big Broadway shows because that's what I'm working on. But, the smaller off-Broadway houses or the 2-people Broadway plays or the regional theaters are all, I think, I feel fairly safe in saying this, are all going to happen before every, big musical is back up on its feet. And that's part of the rolling out of what does and doesn't work that we're going to have to continue to learn from. We rely on people from out of town to buy tickets. I mean, that's something we haven't touched on at all. Right now, God love everybody in Florida and Texas, but I don't want them to come to New York. Yep. So we have to be in a place where that is also something that is safe enough.
Yep. I mean, I know here we have all but about 8 states have a 14-day quarantine to come into Massachusetts. Right. And in fact, Rhode Island just got added to that a couple of days ago. So yeah, we're still in those moments now of a more local audience is probably going to be your first audience. Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Hey, we are a little past 3 o'clock, so I just want to take a moment and say, first off, I'm sorry we lost Beverly. Her connection held almost to the end. For Matt and Penny, is there anything that you were desperately hoping you would get a chance to mention that we did not get to? That's really number one.
No.
No.
Okay. Well, again, I just want to, I want to thank you both for being here. And I want to thank you for the work that you're doing, right? I appreciate your taking the time with us, but I think all of us, whether we are makers of theater or lovers of theater, we're grateful that there are folks doing this thinking and asking these questions and pursuing the ways that we're going to find our way back to something that matters so much to us. So my thanks to you both for that as well.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for
Okay,
having us.
great. Be well. Okay,
Bye.
and thanks everybody. We're going to let you go now. Bye-bye.